The sun began to dip toward the horizon as a strange and wonderful energy filled the air around the mansion of the Clampett family. Granny stood with a look of fierce determination on her face as she turned to her kin and announced that she was ready to face the fight of her life. Jed looked at her with a mix of curiosity and calm amusement while he watched her prepare for what she believed was a grand battle. He asked her where she was going in such a hurry, and she declared that she was going down to the beach to help fight off the Grunions. Jed scratched his head and asked who exactly the Grunions were, because he had never heard of such a group of people in all his years. Granny admitted that she did not know for sure, but she explained that Mr. Drysdale had told them that they were coming in from the ocean that very night to invade the great state of California. Jethro stood tall and announced that he was ready as well, but Granny looked at him and asked where his weapon was located. Jethro proudly held up a small slingshot and claimed that it was right there in his hand, but Granny scoffed and told him that he could not bring down an enemy with a simple slingshot. Jethro insisted that he could, and Granny insisted that he could not, which led to a long and rhythmic exchange of words where they repeated the word can and cannot over and over again until Jed finally stepped in to stop the bickering. Jed told them that they could not have such fighting amongst themselves because they had to stand together as a family against the invading Grunions. He asked Jethro once more who these people were, and Jethro explained that they were the folks fixing to invade California, and that Mr. Drysdale had even shown them a newspaper headline that said the Grunion were coming tonight with a huge invasion predicted. Jethro described how the banker was all dressed up in a uniform and toting a gun, which made it seem like a desperate situation indeed. Meanwhile, at the bank, Mr. Drysdale was bragging to his assistant Miss Thompson about his brilliant performance and how he had convinced the Clampetts that a military crisis was at hand. Miss Thompson asked him if the family really did not know that Grunion were actually just small fish, and Mr. Drysdale laughed and said of course they did not know. He explained that his plan was to keep Mark Templeton in the Navy because if Mark left the service, he would spend $48 million of Jed Clampett's money on oceanography research, which was a cause Mr. Drysdale hated because it meant losing money from his bank. He warned Miss Thompson to be careful with her words because even though Miss Hathaway had resigned, he could still find a way to fire anyone who disagreed with him. Miss Thompson told him that she was not afraid of him and that she could tell Mr. Clampett the truth, which would ruin everything for the banker. Mr. Drysdale called it blackmail but admitted with a grin that he liked her unscrupulous side and thought they could work well together as long as she hid the newspaper. Back at the mansion, the Clampetts were convinced that the Grunions were fierce and warlike people from a mysterious place called the Island of Grun. Jed told Jethro to load up the truck and bring it to the front of the house, and he even placed a flag on the vehicle to inspire the people of California. Granny reminded everyone not to forget the food she had prepared in the kitchen, and she told Ellie Mae to ride shotgun to make sure Jethro did not eat everything before they arrived. They loaded a giant cooking kettle into the truck because Granny believed they might have to live off the land like soldiers during a long siege. As they were preparing to leave, they saw a strange-looking vehicle approaching and wondered if it was a Grunion scout who had already landed on the shore. It turned out to be Miss Jane Hathaway driving a dune buggy, and Jed asked her what had happened to her pretty red car. She explained that Mr. Drysdale had repossessed it, but she was happy with her new dune buggy because it was made for driving through the soft sand of the beach. Granny was surprised to hear that Miss Jane was going to the beach alone, even though the Grunions were coming, but Miss Jane told her that thousands of people would be there in pursuit of the elusive creatures. The family decided to follow her to the south end of Malibu, where Miss Jane had a small gray shack that would serve as their headquarters. Jed praised Miss Jane for being a spunky woman, and Granny noted that she must be from the south because she was defending the southern end of the beach and parking her car on the Robert E. Lee side. Once they arrived at the beach, the family began to dig in and set up their camp with tools and blankets and flags. Jethro was mostly interested in when they would finally get to eat, but Jed told him they had to do some scouting first. Jed looked through his telescope and spotted what he thought was a Grunion scout sitting on a flat boat out in the water, and he told Ellie Mae that the poor creature looked half frozen because he was not wearing many clothes. Ellie Mae offered to swim out and pull him in, but Jed decided they should wait for the enemy to make the first move. Miss Jane arrived and saw their defensive walls and told them it was a clever idea to shield their fire from the wind. She explained to them that you do not actually shoot a Grunion, but instead you capture them by hand because they are small and defenseless. She said they have tiny brains and are purely creatures of instinct who come to the beach every full moon to be caught and fried for dinner. Jed and Ellie Mae realized that the Grunions were not the fierce warriors they had imagined, but they still watched the water with interest. They saw people riding small boards on the waves, and Jed thought they must be the poor sailors from the island of Grun who were constantly falling off their boats. Ellie Mae went for a walk and eventually found a young man with a surfboard, and she asked him if he was a Grunion. The young man was confused but eventually agreed that he was a Grunion just to satisfy her, and Ellie Mae proudly took him back to the camp as her prisoner. Granny was surprised to see the captured creature and noted that he was a scrawny little fella who talked American. Jethro also went out to scout and returned with a young woman who he claimed was a girl Grunion from the island. The family felt sorry for the invaders because they seemed so hungry and cold, so Granny invited them all to sit down for a grand feast of chicken and gravy and ham hocks. The young people from the beach loved the food and called the gravy groovy, which Granny thought was the native language of the island of Grun. In the end, the battle turned into a peaceful dinner party, where the hillbillies showed their famous hospitality to the strange creatures of the California coast, and everyone was happy to share a meal together under the light of the full moon.